Hello and welcome to the easternKicks podcast, a regular magazine programme about East Asian film led by me, Andrew Heskins, founder and grandmaster of easternKicks.com, and James Mudge, our leading writer.
Hey-o.
Each episode we'll be taking a look at the latest films, news and festivals, often chatting to filmmakers and stars along the way. Welcome to our latest show. This episode we're taking a look back at Johnnie To's 2003 classic PTU with another of our contributors, Kaj van Zoelen.
Hello.
Later in the show, we'll have some more easternKicks picks for you to track down on various streaming services, if you can. Meanwhile, Stephen Palmer shares some thoughts on My Left Eye Sees Ghosts. But firstly, we've got that all-important question. What are you drinking this episode, James?
I have a very modestly priced Spanish red wine, which has been in the fridge chilling. And I'm going to kill that for the episode.
Nice.
Well, not that nice, but it'll do. And yourself?
So I've gone quite traditional here myself. I've got a Triple Carmelite.
That looks damn fancy.
Which is 8.4%.
That is damn
good
fancy.
old school Belgian beer.
Yeah, very
Can't really go wrong. Kai, have you got anything to drink this episode?
I've got a Cardu single malt 12-year-old.
Very nice. There you go.
Class.
Hey, this is good. An episode where everyone's on brand and we're all doing well.
Hooray! So let's get on with the chat about PTU. Should we start with a little summing up of the plot?
Yes, I'll go into great length and great detail about it, telling you pretty much everything that happens in the film. Or I'll just say there's an incompetent cop loses his gun. We have a lot of blur. He's trying to get it back, kind of against the background of interdepartmental problems and blurring of the line between cops and criminals. Succinct, but no, it's one of those films though where technically a lot of stuff happens, but it does kind of boil down to that. It's more like that kind of chessboard type thing of different things moving around and different.
There's lots of different characters.
Exactly.
Moving around.
Yeah,
it's almost like a farce kind of a level of these characters, kind of running into each other and what happens next.
Absolutely. And I think even when certainly some of the stills and stuff you see, it does look like a chessboard, kind of at times, the way that they're kind of positioned and stuff like that, and the characters not quite facing off against each other, but being moved around. So it's that kind of thing where it's both. It could be described as being complicated or incredibly simple, and like I was saying to you before, like Limbo. Similar type of thing, the Soy Chang's recent one, which a lot actually happens in it, but at the same time, you can boil the whole thing down just to that kind of one line.
And I think it's interesting that the Limbo it actually kind of borrows a bit from the central plot device of the missing gun. Mm-hmm. And there were other films that did it too, like Liu Chuan's The Missing Gun.
Oh, yes.
From 2002.
Yes. Actually, The Missing Gun, that's true.
There's a bit of it that goes on in Johnnie To's later Mad Detective as well. There's a bit there's this idea of the police gun when it goes missing, and there's no reason for it. That could lead to a lot of trouble for those concerned. It's quite a recurring thing, but
it's true, yeah.
I mean, we should say off the bat here, we're not going to try and cover Johnnie To's filmography by any chance. So we are kind of gonna look at this in the context of.
We're not going to talk about all 55 films in one go.
it's that, but also does that include the ones that he later revealed that he directed? By Patrick Yao?
I'm not sure. It might be up to 60 or
all the Milky Way Image productions on top of that.
Plus all the 80s comedies that you cannot get anywhere anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, exactly. There's no way we can cover everything. So I do think that for me, it's one of the few times when Lamsford, who is always a sideman in Johnnie To films, actually is... And most films,
He's usually a sideman,
really is centre stage.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and his character is not named Fatty for once. Although I saw that in the later sequels, he's reduced to his name is Low, and then it's Fatty Low in the sequels.
It does sound like his fate, you know.
Yes, and he does still have that thing here that classic Hong Kong comedy staple where he has a mole with a large hair going out of it.
That's true, yeah.
Which is all part of this wonderful introduction where he makes a kid do push-ups and forces a gangster of their own table in a restaurant, just to make clear what kind of an asshole he is.
It really sets him up quite well, doesn't it? I think. It's
Yes.
beautiful kind of, and he's a bit naughty, but he's not a bad person.
He's more just
not
bumbling and a
bit,
bit useless, and he's not. That's what's interesting about it, is because he's not, he's obviously a cop and stuff, but he's kind of morally questionable, behavior a bit questionable, but yeah, he's not actually a bad guy in that respect or anything, which is kind of the, that whole era then of those cops are sort of being realistic people who have like problems like everybody else.
Yes, and I think that's one of the main themes of the film is this line where cops do questionable behavior and might not be entirely lawful what they're doing, but yet the way it's framed, it's still sympathetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also not for the greater good either. It's kind of a personal thing in this respect.
Yes.
It's not that what he's doing, trying to get his gun back actually doesn't help anyone. He's just trying to get it back for himself and everything. But I like the way that's not framed as some. I like the way this kind of all the different aspects of the film, which we've not got into the different parts of the plot. Everything does kind of overlap, tie together, and that comes about. The whole pieces on a chessboard type thing. I like the way it all moves together. Narratively, it's very nicely constructed, but there isn't, and I like that sort of lack of. It's not either for the greater good. There isn't. It's this sort of smaller personal stake for him trying to get his gun back because he's a bit of a fool. That's quite. I like that.
Which is just kind of reflects the way the film was made, or the way To sees it as his personal film, and he made it over a course of 3 years while making other films.
I didn't know that.
And so that's part of the reason why it's all shot at night, because it was easier to make that way. He said no crowd control in the streets,
that sounds very,
so he could
very
shoot it cheaply after. And that's why we've got all the same actors and cinematographers, editors, and assistant directors from his other films, because they would shoot this at night after making other films. And he wanted to make this, I think, even in 2000, and he just said to, I'm not sure which executive from another company, said, just give me a small budget, I'll shoot it during other stuff, and at some point you'll get a film out of it.
Fair enough. You wouldn't know, you wouldn't guess that from seeing the film.
It's actually feels wonderfully taking place over the course of one night.
It does. It's
very tight.
That must have been really tough with the cast and everything. Because obviously they'd have all been working on different continuity. Wow, that must have been continuity. Must have been heavy for that.
And Hong Kong cinema isn't necessarily the best for continuity.
No.
So to actually do such a convincing job of it.
There's a striking example of that with the early interrogation scene in the arcade, when there's this sort of henchman who is slapped a lot while he interrogates the other guy, and that kid was an extra who got slapped over 200 times during the scene, making of that scene. Actually suffered hearing loss because of that.
Wow!
And then 6 months later, To reviews the scene and says, "This doesn't feel right. I need to do it again." And he had to beg that guy to come back for that scene. And eventually he did it.
That does sound very Hong Kong cinema, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's one of the things you have to. I'm sure there's other stories from that, even from some of his other productions. I mean, some most of these stories which we've kind of like grown up hearing about, the craziness of shooting Hong Kong films, and whether it's stuff like this and the stunts, or even just the idea of a city as densely populated as Hong Kong, and like so busy and whatnot and everything, like managing, because it's not eerily quiet, but it is It is rather, different, so different. And he did the same with like Throwdown and stuff as well. But so shooting it at night and everything, this kind of mix of some like mad practical decision and reason for doing it that way, and then how it turned out and stuff, it's fascinating.
Yes, I love the way all these, because there's life teeming in the city, but in the background, in there's noises, there's seems to be a party going on, or some other kind of music or sounds or cars, but it's in the foreground. It's this almost eerily quiet at times,
which is just I've never seen I've been to Hong Kong, quite often. Never seen that in Hong Kong. Which is really, and so the fact that they've done it and the fact that he did it over such a period of time and stuff is amazing.
What do you think about? I mean, a lot of people always say that it's accused of being kind of style over substance.
Well, I'd say that the style is the substance, to throw in an old chestnut.
just nicely turned around.
Yeah,
answering it with proper vagueness. I know what you mean. No, saying that about in the same way that we said the plot is both incredibly simple, and then if you broke it down to each individual like substrand of the narrative and the different characters, and you could make it sound really complex. So, and there's not massively much to it, but then it's you could say that about a lot of Hitchcock films.
Yeah,
And I keep saying this like chessboard.
Yeah,
kind of idea. You have your characters. You move them around and stuff, and there isn't massively the underlying themes, but then there is none of the characters are they're all, you could say, basic, but they're all well rounded. They're all actually written. They all have a motivation, a purpose, everything, and how they all play off each other is really well done. So I mean, and it's stylish, but it's not over stylized. I don't think in the same way. Some of his other stuff is with more slow motion. I mean, like Sparrow is much more stylized.
Yeah,
for example. Yeah. Again, not in a bad way at all. And that would be a film where you'd say that the style is a substance. But yeah, I think it is in some ways like a fairly stripped down film in that respect. But I don't think that's in a bad way.
Yeah,
for PTU.
No, and for one thing, I think if the style is this good, what's the
problem? That's also true, because it's not a long film or anything. So it's not like
it's classic sort of 88 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. Sub 90, anything like that. It's fantastic. So it doesn't offend or overstay the welcome in any case. I don't have any problem with that.
No, and I think it also fits in Johnnie To's thematical oeuvre of that kind of that it all. How much chance and luck play a factor in life. It's not overstated in this film as much as it is, or not overstated. I mean, it's not as upfront as it is, for instance, in Throwdown or other films, but it is there, especially in the ending.
There's definitely a kind of, what you say, it's coincidence, luck, karma, fate. I'm guessing karma just tying into other themes he's used in other films and stuff, but yeah, it's not overdone, or it's not. It's more a thematic coincidence rather than the whole narrative was built towards some, coincidental plot twist. It never feels like that.
No, there is something to be said that police brutality is a thing in this film, which I don't know if that for you that plays different now than it did before. After
I don't know.
All the things we've seen in the news in the last few years.
I mean, I'm kind of used, having grown up watching stuff like The Untold Story, Daughter of Darkness, and the Category 3 stuff. The police were always, the Hong Kong police were always kind of phone book police. No, quick, put the phone book there, then hit him, so we don't show the bruises. So having not had any, have never run foul of the Hong Kong police myself. I'm not speaking from any experience, but I think even before these films, the Hong Kong police in films from the 90s onwards, whereas, you had, even when they were being kind of like heroic, even in the John Woo films and stuff, there was always like a counterpoint, whether it was like the heroic hitman was there and stuff as well. So the Hong Kong police have never been massively heroic in films. Even like Danny Lee, he always had prostitutes. He always had a prostitute with him when he was the chief or whatever he was. So they've always been a bit like that. So there's nothing in PTU which stands out too much.
I guess it's only here because most of it's all done not to foil some criminal or make some arrest or something. It's basically just to protect this one guy's loss of his gun. recover that. It's only to cover his ass, basically.
I think we see that in quite a lot of film. I mean, there's quite a few other films where we've talked about the missing gun kind of scenario, but other ones where a cop has done something wrong. I mean, even in the Infernal Affairs films, it's not so much other cops covering it up, but it's still like whether Andy Lau is kind of the cop in that there, and the tension is kind of coming from the fact that he's done something wrong, or completely everything he does is something wrong, but. It's always been a theme where like the cop has done something either morally wrong or practically wrong, and the plot is kind of revolving around that tension of, is he going to get found out? Is what's going to happen to him then? As he's both supposed to be this figure of upholding the law but clearly breaking it, whether for personal reasons or for practical reasons. So I don't know. I mean, Hong Kong police we started to see. I mean, this again goes back into like the post handover thing. We did start to see more stuff in things like Cold War. And some of those other ones where gradually, especially post Infernal Affairs, where IC, whatever they were called, and stuff start to take a much more prominent role in films, everything like that. And we start to see more of a heroic bureaucracy almost in some of these later films.
I mean, the interesting part about that is that you get back to the sort of 70s when there were programs, dramas commissioned by that department that happened to be made by the New Wave and the other sort of the following on from the New Wave in Hong Kong.
Sure.
And so I think that's kind of where it starts to set in, this sort of strange grey area, because to make something dramatic, it's you've got to you're just not going to be a villain or a cop doing bad. You've got to kind of understand them so you can sympathise.
That's a fair point about it. But yeah, in general though, that sort of movement. More recent kind of development aside, I think Hong Kong cops are not seen as being squeaky clean for so much, and the police brutality is in some films it's pronounced, like in some of the category 3 ones I mentioned. It's kind of for comedy but kind of satire, certainly in a lot of Herman Yao films, but it's quite rare to see a completely clean and heroic cop. I guess, and even in Infernal Affairs, Tony Leung, he's still doing stuff with the gang. He's still snorting some lines, everything. So I don't know. I mean, now obviously with the Hong Kong police being what they are, I guess when you look back at some of this stuff, this is just like a logical and sad development of things. I don't know.
How do you feel about the music of the film?
Oh, it's just, it's not an uncommon thing for a Hong Kong film to have. It's very slow and melancholy. It seems. I mean, some of it seems to be sort of like slow, almost kind of folky versions of things like Hotel California. At least one of the main themes sounds like it's Hotel California. But they seem to be like old kind of 70s, 60s, 70s pop hits. But played in a very... But that's quite... I mean, I think that's quite common for Hong Kong films to have that kind of... Because you think of the, John Woo having that
John Woo definitely. But it didn't make a massive... There's nothing good or bad I can remember about it, put it that way.
No, I just noticed it's apart from being a lot of guitar solos, electric guitar solos. There's this specifically one scene where they... one by one go up this abandoned building through the stairwell, and it would be a very tense scene if not for the music. That's the one flaw I found in the film, basically. The scene is
but then that's deliberate, because actually I'll
True,
tell you
but
what, because one thing that's quite interesting about Johnnie To is he does actually, sometimes he uses music really, really very well. And also he's one of the people who's more often, and particularly creating this kind of genre, is much more kind of European focused in what he does. So like, you go back to Longest Nights, and he uses like the full length version of The Chase by Giorgio Moroder for a Midnight Express. It's kind of going on. Or maybe actually kind of extended it for about 10 minutes in the background, and it's really used nicely. And then you get him using people like Xavier Bang. On Motorway and other things he's producing and directing. He did the music for Sparrow. So you've got a French composer, a guy who was in a band with the guys from Air at one point.
Oh, really? Okay.
So you've got something that's much more. I don't want to say sophisticated, but it's a bit different from the kind of Hong Kong approach to music that we know and love, which actually. Using The Chase is quite part of where you've nicked it from somebody else's film and not credited them.
Maybe synthed it up a little bit, but not much.
So that scene has been done deliberately, and he's deliberately not done it in a tense way. I think that's part of it. Is there is a lot of melancholy to it. There is a kind of a weird, almost wistful kind of, and it because he's chosen that kind of music rather than. Like some of the shootout is against a very, very slow. He could have had a very action-packed, it'd be very kind of a Hollywoody kind of thing to do. And instead, he's got this kind of wistful, approach to it. When these guys are the PTU guys are running around in the van and walking around. It's always followed by quite a slow, almost kind of. There's a lot of kind of, the slow electric guitar solos, or there's a mix of kind of acousticy kind of sounds. It's quite wistful.
Yeah.
It's a very deliberate take on the music. I think.
True. I do think though, in that climax, it does drop out a couple of times specifically to get some kind of tension in those specific scenes. There's a specific scene where the CID, the lady detective, she drops her gun in a nice mirroring thing, and then she's trapped in the car, and this other gangster walks by her with the car, and you see this, you see the gun through the window. I think
careful now, no spoilers.
Yeah, no
right.
spoilers.
If you want more about that, I think David Bordwell wrote a great blog post about that once about that scene. But that's when suddenly the sound drops, and then when that short scene of tension is over, the guitars flare up again. So there's these moments where he does go for tension, I think. But yeah, it's true. It's much more about this melancholy air.
And in some way, I think that's giving sympathy to these characters who are kind of wandering through the midnight Hong Kong and just seemingly just kind of running into trouble wherever they turn their head, whichever corner they put their head round.
Yes, and it's also true, I guess, in that other scene where they go up the stairs, it's not so much about what if they're in danger or what they will find. It's about the decision of the rest of the team whether or not to join him on this non-essential mission.
Yeah.
Because they're not going up there to protect anybody or do anything. There's no sign of that. There's just those guys that might know where the gun is might be up there.
I mean, I think it's quite interesting to look at this in the perspective of this creation of this real kind of crime drama, and that Johnnie To is still doing all sorts of different sorts of films, and still carries on to do all sorts of different films that are a lot less lately, which we'll come on to later, I think. But yeah, just definitely at this era, he's still doing all the romantic comedies and just kind of more straight ahead comedies and ghost films and all that kind of thing. But I always kind of feel that this really grew out of the stuff, the real kind of the creation of Milky Way image and that sort of late 90s. As I say, some of the films that he's credited with and some of those that it was later revealed that he did for Patrick Yao. Which actually happened to be some of the best ones, like The Longest Night, which is
Longest Night is still one of my favorite ones for sure, of any kind of period of Hong Kong crime cinema. It's not quite category 3 rated, but still very brutal.
Very brutal.
Very brutal, very
Yeah.
tense, but it's got that full, immoralness to it and everything. Even just the way it's shot is nice, man.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic film.
But when you kind of think about that, and then you have things like the mission and
Expect the unexpected.
expect the unexpected, and then you start to get into into the early noughties. You've got the running out of time. You've got Full Time Killer.
Those films always felt to me like that the transition into a different era for him, from the mission onwards, and because even when you say like The Longest Night and, for instance, A Hero Never Dies, that still feels into an older mold of heroic bloodshed, and then the mission gets into this kind of more slightly laid back, more kind of cool kind of Johnnie To in the crime genre, at least.
And I think you've got this. There's an easing off of those action scenes, I think, as well, which I think is, if you kind of put it in perspective of what was happening at the same time. 2002, of course, you've got Infernal Affairs, and you've got this kind of. James and I have talked about it previously. This kind of little kind of mini resurgence of this as a crime genre. It also feels like something that to a certain extent that Johnnie To realised he could sell a bit more easily to other territories than maybe Running on Karma or all these kind of battier kind of films that he was doing that played very well with Hong Kong audiences. But there was definitely around 2002, 2003, 2004. Obviously there were Infernal Affairs sequels.
Yeah.
You had you coming into this a bit. You had Benny Chan doing Heroic Duo and Divergence.
I'm not sure. I love Heroic Duos, but it's so wacky. I'm not sure that fit. That's like the hypnosis and everything like that. I'm never sure if that fits into this. It's a really interesting one, which I would like to watch again, because it's a strange film, man. in a very good sort of very like uniquely Hong Kong way. But I think that, whereas these ones we're talking about is, as you say, it's more of this crime. It kind of gets away. This stuff we were talking about, so some of the stuff he was doing with Patrick Yao and stuff was kind of, to me, it reminds me more of some of those older ones from the 70s, like Cops and Robbers, things who I can't remember who directed it. There was two or three in that same period, and they're like these ones.
There's a sort of true life series as well.
And they're more like you have the cop stuff, and you have, instead of like John Woo's kind of like sort of ramped up like machismo, heroic bloodshed, homoerotic. This was more sort of like cops with a sort of touch of like everyday, like soap opera. It was the cops sort of getting back to that. You think about like stuff like Expect the Unexpected. So much of it is sort of spent on sort of getting to know them and hanging around in some like sort of crappy cheap restaurants on stakeouts and just chatting about stuff and everything like that. And I think that's what some of the stuff we were seeing in the early 2000s. We were exploring a lot this kind of like blurring of this line between cops and criminals. As them all as the sort of same everyday type of people and everything. And of course, this is like post.
there is that, isn't it? I think it has a whole new kind of gravitas, because you've got obviously that comes into things like City on Fire, where you've got the films where you've got the kind of classic undercover person, and you even got wuxia versions of that have a bit of a take on that. Like La Sarah for Chivalry and stuff like that. They've all got a little kind of a twist on it, but this is a cooler in all sorts of ways take on it. The way it's filmed, the way it's dealt with. It's a little... I think these films tend to kind of dial back on some of the... as you say, some of the kind of the classic Hong Kong kind of... the Heroic Bloodshed, but they dial back on the some of the zaniness.
Or there's not so much like the two-handed guns. But I think as well, this was like, when Johnnie To was... becoming more of a festival darling in the West. His films were starting to get screened more and more and stuff. And people like Tarantino were talking him up and everything. So,
and I think you can almost argue that this is the film that this is the one that kind of really tips it over the edge. Because this is the one that sort of gets picked up, and then his next film in this model, which is another amazing film, Breaking News. Yeah, it plays at Cannes. And then from then on, he is a complete festival darling. That kind of series of.
That's how I originally discovered him.
And you've got Election and See It 1 and 2, and
that's how I got into them, through festival films because in Rotterdam in 2007 they had a whole retrospective. And
that would have been nice to see.
I had never heard of Johnnie To, and I decided, oh, this looks good, Hong Kong crime stuff. And in one day, I saw Election 2, and Exiled. One morning and one afternoon, and that was it. I was completely sold, of course.
that would be cool, because it didn't really make it to the UK as much. I think it's fair to say, a lot of these films, everything, because the UK film festival scene is a bit shite anyway.
Yeah,
I guess.
I think some of them started to drop into things like London Film Festival, where of course London Film Festival is the best film in the world is copying what
Toronto, especially.
Yeah.
No,
because Election screened as part of London Film Festival.
Maybe from that kind of period. Maybe
and they got a reasonable UK release. I can't remember if it was Studio Canal or somebody released them up, but I think particularly the 2 Election films and Exile were quite
excellent. Yeah, that came out as well. But I think in that early 2000s period when stuff like PTU, even Throwdown and stuff like that, it wasn't penetrating so much. To the mainstream UK releasing. Guys like us would have heard of it, but at that stage he was still. I don't know. It's an interesting. We're calling him a festival darling because it's this weird thing where you take some of these films which are not artistic, but they're by no means art house films, and you just suddenly had this thing of whether it's Cannes, whether in Venice it was a happy hunting ground, for him and stuff, but. It's like suddenly it was kind of decided that Johnnie To wasn't just a great director, but he was, an auteur and whatnot and everything. And, he was kind of bundled in with people like Wong Kar-wai and stuff, even though obviously they're completely different kinds of films and everything. Even when Wong Kar-wai was doing semi-crime stuff, like Chungking Express and everything. But it is that kind of Western festival thing where it's like somebody somewhere had a meeting, probably French, and they decided Johnnie To, il est en hauteur. And from then on, he just was. He was loved and sort of brought up by.
Well, and then he kind of gets on to his Umbrellas of Cherbourg Sparrow.
Yeah. Exactly.
Classically, really kind of going for that audience.
And after that, he even made a film with Johnny Holiday.
That's correct. Vengeance,
yeah,
which I think I really like Vengeance.
Vengeance was good.
Yeah, it's solid.
And it even started out, I think, originally as a supposed Hong Kong remake of a Melville film.
Le Samurai.
No, the Red Circle.
Oh, okay.
I think that was originally. They even talked about remaking that with
Alain Delon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he decided it didn't work out, and then this turned into Vengeance with another Frenchman.
It was a good film, and that was very much in that kind of exiled, The Mission, type of mold, which were all. The Mission's one of those films that, it kind of not mythic status, but it became known as being this kind of, not just a cult classic, but a kind of respected one. Again, comes down to this auteur type stuff, which I don't really subscribe to too much, and obviously a lot of that was kind of after the fact, I think as well, because when it came out, it didn't get as much attention in the West. But then fast forward about 5-6 years, especially after stuff like Throwdown, his homage to Kurosawa and everything was there. He was getting treated seriously by sort of critical critics, But I think some of the earlier films that have kind of been reevaluated, and some others have just been ignored. And as we'll probably talk about it, but they just conveniently ignore his romantic comedies and everything like that. And some people are generally probably quite surprised or just don't believe it. They say, "Oh, he just did it for the money," or whatever. Whereas as we've said, like his whole career, he's switched between so many different genres the entire time. So
yes, and I think that also it just shows by the fact that. After that retrospective that I just mentioned in Rotterdam, they didn't show another film of him for 5 or 6 years, even though he kept making them. Only until Drug War came along. Here's another big gangster film with action set pieces. That's the Johnnie To we know, so we'll program that. I once got into an argument about it with the programmer of that section.
Nice.
But it's fair enough, I guess. He's... for Western viewers, especially in that kind of period for Asian cinema and then post-Infernal Affairs and stuff like that, it's hard enough to sell to your average audience at the best of times. So it's not really a surprise that there was kind of both a focus on the action, or the kind of like poetic action compared to, you know, John Woo's heroic bloodshed, and also this idea of him as, you know, a craftsman of Hong Kong cinema and everything.
True.
Neither of which is unfair, but I can see why that would be a focus. It's a much easier sell.
Yeah, and action, of course, translates easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, exactly,
and he
exactly.
is good at it, so it's not even a...
No, no,
you know,
of course.
it's not inaccurate. It just remains very interesting that, you know, how much of his CV probably will always remain unknown to a lot of people.
Mainstream Western audiences. You know, and, from someone who has, you know, has crossed over, you know. And it's just kind of, you look at his filmography as this era we're talking about, which we're kind of getting into the sort of the noughties and the early tens, you know, and you know, some years, you know, easily kind of directing a couple of films.
Yeah, sometimes two or three.
2 or 3 films a year, and then all the ones he produced as well. And there was definitely a lot of films that he was doing, you know, like with Soi Cheung on Accident, that fell very squarely into the same model, the very similar kind of model of the crime, hitman, police kind of drama. And then it just died really after that.
Well, yeah, I mean, from Drug War, I guess.
think, it's like Drug War is the kind of the
well, you saw the writing on the wall, I think. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's my... you know, that was, I think, for a lot of us, when Drug War was coming out, you know, it was first, you know, maybe greeted with a bit of dismay, and then, you know, his first mainland action film. So the idea was, is Johnnie To trying to work within the Chinese system, the mainland system, or is he selling out to the Chinese system? What's happening? And then, you know, when it came out, it was a good film. The Drug War is a really good film, reasonably successful film as well. Did well, even in mainland, it didn't do too badly at the box office and stuff. So, and there was kind of, you know, briefly a bit of hope for Hong Kong mainland productions, and you know, thinking that you know, people could still make these kind of, you know, hard-edged, morally interesting, you know, kind of thrillers. I mean, there's not much action in Drug War, but it's a very tense film, and it's well done. And even the way when he was shooting in China, he did a great job of you know, making use of kind of because obviously the Chinese scenery is so different to kind of like the claustrophobia and the sort of shadowiness and the neon of Hong Kong and stuff. So he did a really good job with Drug War. But then after that, it just...
Well, I guess you could
so
kind of
anyway.
Reflect what was happening at the time in
precisely.
terms of
Well, I don't
the
entirely
mainland.
agree with the notion that it's over after Drug War, because I think
I don't think it's over. It's more
it's a real slowdown.
His
of
productivity.
His
productivity's over.
You know, I mean, when you've gone from easily directing
4 or 5, sometimes up like 4 or 5 a year, and then even then
That's
you're
true.
still doing a couple of films a year, producing about 3 or 4. But I think, I mean, I don't know. I don't, not just for Johnnie To, but I can't see him ever making the kind of films he's made before again. So, and even just looking at the recent stuff he's done, you know, I mean, you never say it's over for somebody, but he doesn't seem like somebody who's particularly keen to get back into it that much, because it's very, very difficult to get back into it that much.
Right. Yeah, I just mean, I think actually one of his finest films was made after Drug War, but
which one?
It's Don't Go Breaking My Heart 2. But
yes,
in typical fashion, it didn't get much of a release in the West anywhere, I think. But
no, it did get released in the UK, because I saw it in a Cineworld, definitely.
But that might have been one of those in that era of...
I can't remember. Yeah,
I think it might have been a sort of day and date kind of...
Yeah, screen for
Panton Street.
This was up in Glasgow.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I remember it was definitely Cineworld there. But you're right. I can't remember the sir. You're right. He wouldn't have got a wide release and everything. But and yeah, you're right. But when we say it's kind of, it's not just finished for him, but I think the action part of him is done. He can continue making, if he wants to, sort of romantic comedies which suit the mainland audience. But I mean, I hated Chasing Dream. To be fair, you know, I
I don't know. Do you know the story? The rumors behind that, or?
I read. Yeah, I mean, I read some of the parts about the story, but it's still.
I don't want to get into that, but.
Oh, you know, you can feel free. It's just, but I don't think it's those kind of situations are going to be uncommon with a lot of these films and everything moving forwards for any Hong Kong filmmakers and everything. So I can't. For someone like him, if he gets back into making these films, it's not it's neither going to be like massively financially beneficial. And the whole Milky Way thing, it wasn't so much initially, I think, a creative enterprise. It was more like a much more efficient production model, because it was the same people working together, and they could shoot like 4 or 5 films back to back using shared cast, screenwriters, directors, producer, which is probably why so many of these times we're saying who actually directed this. I mean, it probably is, they were directing together, and then probably he buggered off for 1 or 2 days to the set of another film where someone else took over. So,
I mean, when you look at the assistant director, actually, I've never been the editor on. But you look at the editor on PTU, which is Law Wing Chun, who's gone on and done lots of other films, but he's got he's listed as assistant director on a lot of the films of this era.
Yeah,
yes.
For Milky Way.
Absolutely. So I think that line is kind of blurred and stuff. So for him, obviously, as well as being like creative, he is somebody who is, he doesn't need to make films anymore. And if he's not able to make films in that Milky Way anymore, and if he's not able to make, if he's very limited in the choice of films he can actually make, then I don't know. Hopefully we'll see more stuff from him, but I would be a bit surprised if I'm being honest. Sadly, I mean that in a very, very sad way and stuff. I can't really see more coming, and I'm very happy if I'll be proved wrong, on that. But I mean, Office was okay. I guess Office. It was okay. It was interesting. I saw that I actually saw that in Hong Kong in 3D, and it was not bad. And 3 was, I didn't like 3 very much, and
didn't gel, did it?
No, it
didn't gel at all.
No, and I think it was another one of those ones which was trying to, be a Hong Kong-ish kind of film, but at the same time being okay to release in other markets. Not one other market in particular, which is a real shame. Yeah, there's the rub. Not... He's not a director who has anything to prove anymore, because he's been in the industry so long. He's made so many Stone Cold classics. As we've said, like he's defined the crime. If you have him, John Woo on one side, you have him on the other. It's just there's not much more you could ever need to say in terms of what they need to do or prove themselves. And if he wanted to make a film outside of the Hong Kong, or now we'd say the mainland system, then I'm sure he'd be very much welcome with open arms, but it'd be a lot of hassle for him, I imagine. So I don't know, but I'm fairly pessimistic about the future of Hong Kong cinema anyway, so that's tying into my general view.
From what I've seen of what you can really call true Hong Kong cinema, it's very low budget, small productions only anymore. Yeah,
and even that one, it's not going to really last, I don't think. But
true, that's possible.
But even before, these kind of recent ones, he had a few stabs at other ones like that. Life Without Principle. So that was a pretty interesting film, and that's probably the last one, because that was just before Drug War, right? That's probably the last one where he really got into those kind of moral complexities. Because I think at the heart of so many of these ones which we've been talking about, it is just this idea still of like the cop as an everyday person who's running into like everyday pressures, tensions, and stuff, and sometimes makes bad decisions as a result of whether it's financial pressure, family pressure, or just screwing things up like PTU. And I think that was always something I enjoyed seeing and stuff, because you go from this kind of almost like superhuman John Woo type figures, or you go from this sort of clear definition of like good and bad cops and robbers and everything. So that's one of the things that was most interesting about his films. I mean, away from like the wonderful sort of like poetic visuals or the sort of noir look and everything he brought to Hong Kong, which was a really interesting update from the sort of neon and everything of the 90s to this kind of like almost like black and white, the use of shadow, it completely so much slow motion in some films, but a completely different use of slow motion to John Woo. I mean, shadow, Sparrow, thinking, the sort of jazziness of Sparrow and everything, which is great to see. And he was still making some of the films he's made even in that post 2000 period are pretty whack though. Like Linger. I wasn't really a fan of Linger. I don't know. Do you even remember Linger?
No.
It's the only one from the last 20 years that I've not yet gone to tried to see, really. I gone to the trouble of acquiring it.
I wouldn't, kind of. It's nothing that's bad. I mean, it's not like Chasing Dream or anything, but it's just not. It just feels like not even like a cash job, because you can't see why anyone thought it'd be popular. But he's not like infallible by any means all the way through his CV, which is fair enough as well. And as that kind of comes down to, as we said before, like a lot of people just don't know his full CV. They just know the sort of main ones which have been highlighted or been at festivals and everything, which is fair. But for this, for that kind of early 2000s Hong Kong, this kind of move into this different type of like crime and action cinema. Yeah, he was kind of the master of that, because John Woo by that stage wasn't really.
No,
he
John
was
Woo
quite happily
gone stateside and
buggered off stateside. He was making
doing that payback.
Oh God!
This is a regular skit on the show. Is not remembering what it's called.
And
It's called Paycheck.
It is called Paycheck, isn't it?
Yes. And
But every time we can't remember for sure.
That was made in the same year as PTU.
Exactly.
Well, there you go. That proves it exactly. So,
and that was that was John Woo's effort after Mission Impossible 2, wasn't it?
Where did Windtalkers come into that? With Nick
Yeah, that's in between Mission Impossible and Paycheck.
But that just underlines. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that either. John Woo went Hollywood, and he's one of the few directors to have sort of maintained a certain profile.
Yeah.
I was going to say a profile, if not quality,
yeah,
of making films out there and stayed making films there, which is fine. But yeah, at that time, in these early 2000s and stuff, and obviously from stuff like PTU and Throwdown's not a crime film, but it's a very similar kind of look and feel to PTU, and from those ones, and then stuff like Exiled and everything. Really, you can see that in so many other crime titles. I mean, like Infernal Affairs and stuff is slightly different because it is a combination of that kind of plotting, but maybe then visually it kind of harks back to the 90s a bit more. But so many other films then kind of followed on from what Johnnie To was doing at that time. And as we said, like within this Milky Way system as well, as people who were like ADs, who were like editors, who were working on stuff, were moving on to then making other films and stuff. And it whether it's then or all these different periods of Hong Kong history, they've had such a great fucking industry and system for actually bringing through directors all working together, sort of getting training. Whether it is like the old sort of TVB system, which obviously Johnnie To was part of. Yes. And then, Patrick Yao, they were all part of the TVB thing, and that's all.
And even directly from PTU, there's a series of 5 films made 5 years later.
Those were good as well. Those were surprisingly good. So I remember when I was writing for Yes Asia, I get sent all of them, watched all of them, and they're all surprisingly good. I mean, even though the budgets are a bit lower and stuff, they still, they're still actually really good stories and stuff. They don't feel too much like sort of cheap TV movie cash and stuff. They still got great cast, and a lot of effort went into the actual stories. Them, so yeah, those were all very good. So. But yeah, without that kind of system, there, even if we get another couple of films from Johnnie To, and God hope they're good ones and everything, that system just isn't there now.
Well, I mean, I guess the one last fraction of it is the Fresh Wave that, again, Johnnie To.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he was
set up.
That's right. Yeah. He was one of the founders of Fresh Wave, wasn't he?
And he took advantage of with Trevisa as well.
Yes, yeah. Trevisa, that horror film, which is on Shudder. I still love that he's scrolling through fucking Shudder, and I'm not sure. Wait, was that Trevisa? No. Wait, scroll back. It's Trevisa. It doesn't even try to say like this is a horror film. It just says something like there's some sinister plot twists. There's not really, to be honest.
No.
But you're right, though. Yeah, but that's
the last kind of bastion of, and actually has in its own way come the closest to doing the same thing of bringing some young filmmakers, up and coming filmmakers through the process. And
yeah, Fresh Wave has been for many a fantastic thing for Hong Kong. Whether it's the mentorship or whether it's the efforts they put into like getting films to play out overseas at festivals and funding the young directors to travel and stuff. So obviously it's been running into problems over the last few weeks and everything. So with films being pulled and directors getting into trouble, because like every Fresh Wave, every time there's a Fresh Wave competition or edition, you can guarantee there'll be a few films which say we're not covering any Hong Kong riots, but they'll be in the background as a backdrop for a story of intergenerational communication. I'm seeing a picture of an old grandfather or a father, and his young daughter is.
It's quite often a dad and his daughter.
It's usually the daughter, isn't it? It's not usually the son for some reason. But yeah, we're taking the piss of it. But it's still, hope that the Fresh Wave can does
can carry on.
and
I
not
think
just
when
as
you've
a
got
way
these
of
pressures in, it's
hope it doesn't.
just this makes it ridiculous because you know, as we say, it's such a minor backdrop.
Yeah, it's just there. It's not even. You don't see anything. Nothing happens. It's just. So yeah, hopefully that'll continue. But you're absolutely, in terms of Johnnie To, he was instrumental in setting that up, and I think that's always been one of the great things about Hong Kong. You know, for such a geographically small area, with such a dense population, to have had this film industry, which is. I'm not going to say conquered the world because that sounds a bit arsey, but you know, it's had such an influence over Hollywood, over other cinemas of other countries, and it's thrown up directors like Johnnie To, who have become international festival darlings, and they made so many great works over the years and stuff. So it's, and in a way, like it's another one of those directors who you could say truly kind of represents the Hong Kong industry. From like the very start of his career, whether it's TVB up through some of the wackier stuff in the 80s, and through to this, some of the 90s stuff sort of gradually building up towards this kind of, as we said, like post, and I think PTU is the film where you could kind of draw that line and say, from then on he was going in this direction. He's been one of those guys who's at every stage has kind of summed up or represented the Hong Kong film industry.
So PTU is available now from Eureka. As part of the Eureka's Masters of Cinemas collection, as Johnnie To is classified as a Master of Cinema and not and part of their classic.
Not a classic.
On UK Blu-ray.
Hi there, Stephen here, and have I got a little secret to tell you. All those crime dramas the team have been telling you about, now of course they're great, but the truth is that they are way more popular abroad and at film festivals and amongst Western critics than they are at home in Hong Kong. To's Milky Way image film production company that he set back up in 1996 with long-term collaborator Y Cafe simply wouldn't survive on the kudos achieved by films such as The Mission, PTU, Election, Mad Detective and so on. The secret to To's cinematic longevity is a unique business model. The gritty crime dramas with an art house aesthetic are fundamentally funded by populist romantic comedies, fun vehicles for stars like Sammy Cheng, Louis Koo and Andy Lau. And these go down a storm in local Chinese-speaking markets. But you're not likely to see a release of any of these from Criterion or Eureka or Arrow or Masters of Cinema. But armed with a multi-region DVD player, or maybe an internet connection with a VPN that can manipulate your geolocation, you can explore another side of Johnnie To. To start you on your journey, let me bring your attention to 2002's My Left Eye Sees Ghosts. The international success of M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense had an impact even on Hong Kong cinema. Films about ghosts will be popping up in Hong Kong cinemas with regularity. You'll know about the Pang brothers' The Eye or Leslie Cheung's tragically prophetic Inner Senses. You'll also probably know that Chinese peoples have a slightly different relationship with death and the afterlife than we do in the West, so it's not surprising that a filmmaker like To went a slightly different route, and instead of horror movie, made a romantic drama about ghosts, about grieving, about letting go, whilst also making it pretty darn funny. Queen of Cantopop, Sammy Cheng, had already been lucky enough to make that move from singing to acting pretty much perfectly, with the To Cafe directed Needing You back in 2000, a film that bucked the trend of a slump in Hong Kong cinema, with the combination of Shantos Cheng with Heavenly King Andy Lau winning over the local audience. Cheng and To have continued to collaborate over the years, but for my money, My Left Eye Sees Ghosts is the pinnacle of what the pair have achieved together. Cheng plays May, whom we meet at the funeral of her husband, whom it transpires has died 7 days into their whirlwind romance and marriage to super-rich Daniel. May is frankly repulsive as a character, appearing to be little more than a selfish gold digger, much to the chagrin of Daniel's family. And one drunken binge leads to a road accident where she appears to die, but is literally shoved back into her body by a passing ghost. Upon her recovery, May finds that she can see spirits, at least via her titular left eye, and the ghost that saved her life introduces himself as the ghost of Ken, a child who died in a typhoon back in elementary school. Ken is played by the ever-game Sean Lau Ching Wan, who invests his character with an initial childish high spirit, whilst later sliding effortlessly into the gravitas the plot eventually requires. I'm not going to describe that plot in too much detail, but rest assured, much ghost-related hijinks occurs. Now, I could mention the performance of Sammy Cheng, who is equal parts detestable and adorable in this film, all willowy limbs and dyed hair and every inch the superstar, yet willing to debase herself for comedic effect. And if it made you more comfortable, I could not only tell you more about how good Sean Lau is in this film, but maybe you'd like to know that others in To's regular acting troupe make an appearance, including Lam Suet as May's contemptible and money-obsessed father, and Simon Yam in a highly amusing couple of scenes. Oh, and let's not forget Wong Ting Lam, Hong Kong legend, as well as the father of notorious Hong Kong producer-filmmaker Wong Jing. I could mention the jokes, a mix of Mo Lei Tao and some more decipherable comedic moments. I could mention the genuine moments of touching drama and character growth that pepper the film's runtime. And all these things are important, but the icing on this cake is, well, the twist. The clues to the twist are pretty much in every scene, but whether you unpick the mystery or not, you'll have a satisfied feeling once the truth is laid bare. And if you don't get it, then a second watch is absolutely revelatory, showing you that every comedic moment, every bit of oddness, every costuming choice is there at the service of the story. I'm going to level with you. I'm pretty sure most Asian film critics dismiss My Left Eye Sees Ghosts as a side order in To's cinematic smorgasbord of quality films. But again, go and explore, give it a chance, and I promise you'll see that To deserves his place at the very top table of directors, and his alternate career is about as much more than funding his dirty little crime habit.
And on to some easternKicks picks. What have you got for us, James?
I've got quite a few things again. As you know, we seem to we're continuing, especially Netflix, picking up more and more stuff, and I have to say, becoming easier to find. I know King Shock. Man,
are you sure they just haven't updated the app so it knows you a bit better?
Actually, what I'll say, no, I mean joking aside, what I'll say is that I now search for stuff on my laptop because it's different accessing through a browser compared to accessing it directly on my TV. So I'm finding it much easier to actually come across stuff. I mean, some stuff is still buried in there, but either they're improving or it's just that it's easier in the browser. So I add stuff to my list through the browser now. And it's there when I go back to the TV. But we've now got a whole bunch of stuff, like the Eighth Day, with a new Korean horror, which is another kind of, not quite the Wailing or that Svaha, the sixth or seventh finger. I can't remember how many fingers there were, but it's another one kind of like that with a bit of exorcism, some sort of shamanism and stuff.
The Mimic as well is another some of those.
Yeah, it's more on the sort of, I don't know, it's billed as being kind of a mystery thriller because it is kind of a horror film, but it's it's okay. It's just very slow moving. Everything like that. And some of its horror elements are a little jarring, but it's an interesting one to see on there. And it is just under 2 hours, which is a plus. 115 minutes, so that's not too bad. Dynasty Warriors is on there now. You know, the video game adaptation from Roy Chow, director of Murderer, which everyone who likes Hong Kong cinema should like Murderer, of course. We can probably do an episode on Murderer.
I think we should do an episode on Murderer, so we won't talk too much about it now, but I think we should do an episode on Murderer.
A spoilery episode on Murderer. But he did stuff like Nightfall as well, so he seems like an interesting choice. I haven't watched it yet. It's got, you know, obviously Louis Koo in there. I think Lam Suet's in there as well, Karina Lau, Philip Hyung. So it's another one of these ones, though, that's, I believe it's in Mandarin. So, I don't know, I'm going to watch it. It looks like a CGI eyeball burner and everything. I doubt it's going to be great, but I will watch it and duly review it for Eastern Kicks. Japanese one called A Family, which is directed by someone I hadn't heard of, Michihito Fuji. Apparently won a few awards for stuff like The Journalist a couple of years back, but honestly haven't really heard of him or her before. This is not a Yakuza one, but it's supposed to be like a much more realistic one, like a kind of epic longer film about some young guy who joins second stage he's in prison, and third stage he gets out, and you know the Yakuza are less relevant now, so trying to, you know, find some way to, you know, sort of make ends meet and everything. So it's supposed to be pretty good.
Yeah.
Eric Matty's on the Job has been added.
Oh really? Finally.
Yeah, exactly. It's been I haven't seen that for years, but that's still one of the best, not just Filipino, but one of those, you know, having talked about Johnnie To, I mean, this is a completely different style, but it's a fantastic film.
I mean, there was, I think even back when it was kind of screened at festivals, there was talk about a US remake.
That's right.
Which never seemed to have happened. Right. I mean, I like Eric Matty. I mean, he's a fabulous guy to interview, I have to say. But he's, I like his films as well. He's a solid filmmaker.
I do as
One
well.
of my fathers are solid.
So
there's some horror stuff as well. Some of it very wacky, some of it more almost kind of old school Italian.
He's
demonic
definitely a horror guy from
some
going by. I mean, some of the interviews I've read and stuff. But we also have the second season of Naked Director, the Japanese AV series, which is pretty popular. That's been added. But the main thing I guess people are looking forward to is that New Kingdom one, like Ashen of the North.
That's right.
Which is coming in in a couple of weeks' time.
Which is kind of it's a special episode, isn't it?
I think it's more like a special extended episode. I don't think it's even a mini-series. I don't think it's more than one. But it's not being called a film either. So, which hopefully means it's not 2 hours, 20 minutes long. It has a lot of crying in it. But.
To be fair, both seasons were not much longer than the average. They weren't much longer than the average Korean film.
Absolutely, which was definitely to Kingdom's benefit, you know. But I'm looking forward to seeing that. So that's landing in a couple of weeks. And then on Amazon, which conversely has become even more difficult to find anything on, I did find Johnnie To's 3 on there. There you go. I'm not going to watch it again, but it's on there. It's on Prime as well, so it's not like a rental one. And I found The Swordsman, you know, the 2016 one.
Okay, yeah, that was the Derek Yee
one.
Yeah, very CGI.
It is. It's one of the. It's a shame.
And it's a remake of The Duel.
Yes, it's a remake of
Duel. Hang on.
It's not Duel to the Death. It's
Death Duel.
Death Duel. That's
Death
it.
Duel.
There you go.
Which he was the lead star of.
Yeah, and it's. I haven't rewatched. I watched it when it came out.
Death Duel's a great film. That's a fantastic. That's a classic. Shaw Brothers film.
Absolutely. And for this one, I remember watching it when it came back in 2016. And it's a bit awkward just because of the CGI. Because you can tell it's going for the same like imagination and stuff as the old school stuff, but the CGI just doesn't massively work. But I might check it out again. So and then I gave up trolling through Amazon. So there you go. That's it. Plenty of stuff on Netflix, and which hopefully will still be there at the time of listening. No guarantees, man.
No guarantees. Have you seen or come across anything that you would like to tell us about, Kai?
Yes, if I'm pronouncing it right, Jagamethandiram. which is a Tamil film by Karthik Subbaraj, starring Dhanush, and takes place in UK for the most part.
Okay.
Right.
Because as he says, Dhanush has in the trailer also gleefully, I'm going to be a Tamil gangster in the UK. or in London, I think he says.
Fair play.
It's a really, I don't know, I really liked it. It's a really interesting gangster film that turns into a drama about immigration and the fate of the Tamil population of Sri Lanka.
Wow. Okay. Well,
Interesting.
There's a lot of typical action scenes, which they have to be you have to have the taste for that. Very particular kind of Indian action. Although similar to To, when they shoot guns, they stand around a lot, looking cool. So there's that link, I guess.
Where'd you see that?
I think it's on Netflix.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. It was originally supposed to have a theatrical release in India, but then they released it on Netflix instead.
Okay. Cool.
So that's it for now. Thanks to Kai for joining us on this episode.
Yeah, thanks.
My pleasure.
Don't forget you can find all our previous episodes on Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and you'll never miss an episode. But for now, there's just one thing to say, and that is cheers.
Cheers. See you.
Cheers.